So we're going to get started. I want to just say welcome to Latham and Watkins, and thank you for joining us today for this exciting event. My name is Nicole Fanjul, and I am one of the co-chairs of Latham's New York chapter of the Women Enriching Business Group, or WEB. WEB's mission is to promote women in business, as the name suggests, both outside and inside the firm, through global and local efforts that are designed to create broader networks and productive business relationships, to attract top talent, and generally to support the long-term success of women. So we are thrilled today to partner with the Association of Corporate Counsel and Debbie Epstein-Henry to put together this distinguished panel to talk about what general counsel want. It is, as a Latham lawyer, meeting and exceeding the expectations of our clients is always a top priority, and it's events like this that help us to better understand how to effectively partner with in-house counsel and to ensure compliance with best practices. So I'd like to turn it over to Brian Campbell, who is the ACC New York City chapter president, to do an introduction for our panelists.
Thank you very much, Nicole. And thanks, everybody, for coming out today. We know it's tough with a beautiful day out there to get everybody inside, but I think you're going to be pleasantly surprised by the conversation. I'm very excited about it, and I think it's going to be a great panel. As Nicole mentioned, I'm the immediate past president of the New York City chapter of ACC, and I've made it one of my goals to try and increase our career development and programming so that people can get professional development advice. And so I think this panel speaks directly to that, but I think you're going to get a lot of other insights about what general counsel want. So with that, I'm going to start with the introductions. We've got a great panel today, and immediately to my right, I have Maria Harris, who is the Vice President and General Counsel at SoulCycle Inc., the boutique fitness and hospitality company I'm sure everybody knows. Prior to joining SoulCycle in 2017, Maria held a number of senior international in-house roles in the retail, beauty, and pharmaceutical industries as General Counsel Americas for The Body Shop, the UK beauty retailer, Assistant General Counsel for Global Business Operations at Revlon, and Assistant General Counsel at Warner Chilcott Pharmaceuticals. To Maria's right, I have Ho Shin. Ho is the Executive Vice President and General Counsel of Yext Inc., the leading digital knowledge management platform based in New York City. Ho helped lead the company through its successful 2017 IPO and its listing on the New York Stock Exchange. As a key member of Yext's executive team, Ho is responsible for handling all global legal and regulatory matters for the company. Before joining Yext, Ho helped lead Millennial Media, Inc., a leading mobile advertising platform, through one of the most successful IPOs of 2012. To Ho's right, I have Sheila Davidson. All right. Sheila's got the home field advantage, apparently. Sheila is Executive Vice President, Chief Legal Officer, and General Counsel of New York Life Insurance Company. In addition to leading the company's legal operations, Sheila also oversees its compliance, governance, and operational risk functions. Sheila joined New York Life in 1991 and has served in many leadership positions in legal, compliance, and administrative areas. And then to Sheila's right, we have obviously Debbie Epstein-Henry. Yeah, there we go. Debbie's always got home field advantage wherever she goes. And for those of you who don't know, we at the ACC chapter have been working for a long time to get a program with Debbie, and we appreciate the opportunity to work in this environment. And if you've seen any of Debbie's other programs, you'll know why. But just a little background on Debbie. She's a recognized expert, consultant, best-selling author, and public speaker on careers, workplace, women, and law. Debbie is the founder of DEH Consulting Speaking Writing, and she consults for companies, firms, nonprofits, and individuals here in the United States and globally. In 2006, Debbie conceived of the Best Law Firms for Women initiative, a benchmarking survey and competition she ran for a decade with Working Mother. She wrote 2 ABA best-selling books, Law and Reorder and Finding Bliss, and her work has been featured by hundreds of news outlets, including the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. Debbie built a network of over 10,000 U.S. lawyers, and from there, she co-founded Bliss Lawyers, a majority women-owned company that employs lawyers to work on temporary engagements for in-house and law firm clients. So there's the welcome to the panel. Thank you very much, and we look forward to a great presentation.
Thank you. So We're okay with mics. Can everybody hear? Think we're okay? Back there? Great. So first, Brian, thank you so much for that generous introduction, and it is really a distinct honor to be able to collaborate with ACC and you and Latham, and really, really delighted to be here and host a conversation with this distinguished panel. We're going to get into that in just a moment. I have just a few preliminaries that I want to mention, and then we'll get underway. One is that members of the press are in attendance, so we've asked them to, if they want to quote anybody with attribution, to seek those people out before doing so that our conversation is not inhibited. The remarks by the panel and otherwise are not attributed to any organizations. They're all individual remarks. We do have a live international webcast going on. We have about 1,000 people internationally. We are not able to take questions through the webcast, but we will do Q&A with the audience. And certainly if the webcast participants want to tweet about the event, the Twitter hashtag is, it's hashtag DEH, what General Counsel want. So with that, let's get started. I will do proper thank yous of everybody involved with Latham afterwards, but we would not, without further ado. This topic, what General Counsel want, is actually something I've really been focused on for about the past, about a decade. When I did my first book tour in 2010, I did events with GCs around the country in 13 major markets, and they were household name GCs, the then GCs of companies like GE and Cigna and DuPont and Motorola Solutions, those kinds of places. And what struck me is before doing the events, I thought, well, a lot of the lawyers who I counsel and interact with were really unhappy, but the general counsel must be really happy. And what I discovered, you know where this is going, what I discovered in these conversations with these GCs that is, regardless of geography and regardless of industry, they were really unhappy with how legal services were being delivered. And so the question is, how do we get here? But most importantly, as per today's discussion, what do general counsel want? And we're going to cover this discussion, both what you want for yourselves in your own career development, what you want for your teams, and importantly, what you want from outside counsel. So that's where I'd like to start, really actually what you want for yourself. And start with you, Maria, and just ask you to talk a little bit about your career, and in doing so, really, what skills did you have to get that coveted top spot at the GC level, and what did you have to do to cultivate skills that you didn't have in doing that?
Thanks so much, Debbie, and thanks to Latham for hosting me. I was an associate here, so I'm really happy to be back. I have been general counsel at SoulCycle for just over a year. So I'm relatively new to this role. Before then, I had, as Brian mentioned, a bunch of in-house roles with varying levels of seniority. I think the first sort of ingredient is incredible hard work, if we're being honest. And then when I was at the firm, the things that I recognized that I was good at was relationship building. And I thought about that, and I said, what are the places where I can take these skills with me and really develop relationships with my clients? And that's what sort of led me initially on the path to becoming an in-house lawyer. And then the fostering of those relationships and the hard work that goes together with that, both with lawyers and with business people, to be honest, is sort of how I continue to move through my career and have different opportunities and hear about these roles and get calls when positions were available. It's very humble of me to say that, I rely on people to look out for me, but it's because I looked out for them during the course of my career. So a lot of it is building relationships, and that's a key for being, I think, a general counsel and being an in-house lawyer in general.
I think that's so important because I think so often I'll speak to in-house lawyers who are just saying, oh, I'm so relieved, I'm no longer a law firm lawyer, I'm off the hook, I no longer have to network, I don't have to generate clients, and just the fact that you say that building relationships is so integral to your success, and how you got to the GC level, I think, is so critical, and we'll come back to that. But Ho, same question for you, if you could just talk about some of the skills you had to develop to get into the GC spot and how you did.
Sure. So it's funny because I don't think I came out of law school even really knowing what a GC was or GC did. I don't think I ever set out, hey, I want to be a GC. I actually started out as a litigator, which is funny because I grew up watching LA Law, and so that's what I thought that's what lawyers did. I thought they tried cases, I thought they cross-examined witnesses, stuff like that. So I spent probably the first 6, 7 years of my career doing litigation, and at the Justice Department, it was a blast. I mean, I had a good time, but I think I found myself, it's so combative and it's so exhausting because, litigation by its nature, something has gone wrong and you're just trying to figure out how to assign the blame. And so I think that was really starting to wear on me. I spent most of my time arguing with people, opposing counsel or witnesses or whatever. So it's funny because at the time this was, sort of the mid to late 90s, and the internet 1.0 was starting to take place. So it was a pretty cool phenomenon that was taking place. And and I was starting to get a sense I really wanted to be more a part of an organization, help build it, help build a business. But what I was also finding as a litigator was that there weren't a lot of in-house positions, not nearly as many as like transactional positions. And so it was tough. And back then this was before all the Indeed and LinkedIn, and so I felt like, by the time I heard about a in-house litigation position, it was already filled. So I actually was very fortunate, though, because this was a time when a lot of early stage companies were getting funded, VC funded, and I had a good friend, sort of like a peer, who had gone over to one of the early internet advertising companies, advertising.com, and they had just gotten their Series E round of funding, and they were growing. And his background was mostly transactional, and he was looking for someone to come over. And with only 2 people, we ended up, doing just about everything. And so what I ended up doing, it was not doing much litigation, but spending the next, half dozen a year or more years just doing commercial deals and really sort of rounding out my transactional skill set. And as things played out, that company was eventually bought by a public company, and I became GC, but it was nice because I didn't have the responsibilities of all the 33, 34 Act because we were a sub. So I could, again, sort of further round out my skills doing employment and labor and some of the other stuff, non-securities related. So in fact, my first 2 GC positions were for subsidiaries of public companies, so without the public company, requirements, but, I think it was a nice way for me to sort of, establish my footing. And then from there, it's funny how things turn out. The same folks I worked with at advertising.com ended up founding Millennial Media, and that was positioned to go public, and so I kind of reunited with them, and that was my first public company gig. So for me, it's been sort of an evolution where I've been able to, I've been fortunate to able to sort of gradually increase some of the skill sets.
Right, but while you're attributing a lot of it to fortuity, of course, you were accessing and identifying those opportunities and the skills that you needed to develop, and obviously doing a good job so that people then sought you out. And again, coming back to Maria's point, you had those relationships that gave you the entree to the millennial. So it's piecing that together and sort of being able to trace that for people who are looking in that regard. So
for sure.
Absolutely. So Sheila, you've had this illustrious career, as your cheering squad will attest to, at New York Life. So could you talk about really, sure, your path?
Yeah, my story is shorter and less complicated, right? I was also of the LA law generation and also came out of law school thinking that's what lawyers did. But I also came out not really wanting to work for a law firm. So this is how I'm different. One of the things that's been fun in preparing is how different all of our circumstances are, and yet, also finding the commonality in it. So I never worked for a law firm. There it is, it's an open secret. I was a regulator. I was a regulator at the NASD, which is now FINRA, and I was an enforcement lawyer. When I was in law school, I interned for the trial unit of the enforcement division of the SEC, and I liked that. And so I became an enforcement lawyer at the NASD. And what I learned there was really had a lot of interaction with very senior executives from all of the Wall Street firms, because at the time, these cases were tried before peers of business people. So I learned a lot, really, without, by osmosis, about governance. I mean, it was a litigation position. It was depositions and investigation and hearings. but just had a really good grounding in both the regulatory side of it, but also learned a lot, which I didn't realize until I had to draw on it later, about governance, about how people think about control functions inside a company. So I did that for about 5 years. My parents were both deceased and my student loans weren't getting any smaller. And I thought, I better go somewhere where I'm going to make a little bit more money. My husband at the time was working at Sullivan & Cromwell, so it was just reinforcing my decision. No offense to Sullivan & Cromwell, but I think he billed 2,400 hours that year. So I went in-house and I answered an ad in the New York Times. That's how I got to New York Life. They were looking for a broker-dealer lawyer.
This is typical now, right?
Yeah. And I have been there ever since. I've been there 27 years this month. But the skill that I would say, or probably the best piece of advice that I ever got from any mentor that I had was someone in every step of my career too, and I'm a little ashamed of this, although I do try to do it for others, somebody had to push me to take the next step. And after a certain point, like not once or twice, like 10, 12 times, I started doing that on my own. It's very difficult to do that, right? Particularly, you've all probably heard, there are a lot of women in the audience, the studies about women. Are you ready for this job? Women can have 90% of the skills and say, they feel 50% ready. Men could have 50% of the skills and say they feel 90% ready. That's just a challenge, right? So somebody was always pushing me. It was always a man, too, who was almost always pushing me to do the next thing. But the best piece of advice I got from any of them was he was saying, they were asking me to be the chief compliance officer of the company. I'm like, well, I'm a lawyer. I don't do compliance. I don't really want to do that. And he said, well, what do you want to do? And I said, I don't know. And he said, well, ultimately, before you retire, what do you want your top job here to be? So I said, hem-tawed, general counsel. He said, what's the first word in that? General, right? So that has been a huge lesson for me. That's the skill I think that is most important, and I think you both have highlighted that too. You have to learn to do things outside your area of expertise if you want to be a general counsel, because that's what it means. And you have to learn how to rely on other people's expertise and be comfortable with that. So to me, that's the best thing that I've learned in my experience about this.
It's a really great example, and I think through examples we learn so much. And I think when I talk to a lot of in-house lawyers, what they'll say is that they also moved away from the law firm perfectionist mentality because they've just got to get the business done. And so in addition to relying on other people, they
cover your ears.
They have to rely on judgment more and just making that decision and doing that. But I actually want to stick with this notion of qualities of a leader and turn back to you, Maria, and just say, what do you think are really the most important qualities of a GC and specifically any effective leader?
I think one of the things that I've learned and that I look for in my outside counsel as well is extreme curiosity about every aspect of the business. I think a general counsel has to know their business in and out, and I expect that also from my outside counsel. So asking questions constantly, learning as much as you can about your business on the way in, confidence. But I would also say confidence and humility, right. Because you have to convince everybody that they're okay, that you're the safe hands, that you've got this, that you're going to be calm no matter what's going on behind you or underneath you or in your head at night. You've got the safe hands. And then, your judgment. I mean, you just have to, as you said, have good judgment. Everything is gray in in-house world for the most part. And so the ability to sit in a room, understand the facts, understand the business objective, and the most right way to get there, identifying the risks, but also understanding, if you're not taking legal risks, you're taking business risks at some point.
And I think it's interesting the contrast that you conveyed about confidence yet humility. And some of the recent Harvard Business Review stuff that I've listened to and read is around humility as a really important quality in a leader, and also vulnerability. I just wonder, how have you experienced that at Yext? And is that, I don't know, I've been watching a lot of advertisements too of people apologizing, Starbucks and Uber and stuff. Is this?
If I may, the one thing I say to my junior lawyers when they start with me is I say, remember, when you walk into these rooms, oftentimes you're probably the smartest person in every room that you're in when you're with business people or salespeople. I'm sorry, but it's true.
We didn't invite them. It's okay.
And I said, but you have to be the smartest person in the room, but you can't act like the smartest person in the room. You have to be in service of your client. So that is part of it too, is sort of understanding where you can lend your expertise and move the business along without sort of being that pedantic know-it-all that people assume you are when you're an attorney walking into a room.
Yeah. Well, so first, fortunately, no, we haven't had to make a public apology.
Right. I wasn't going there.
Yeah, exactly. So happy to say that. I think Sheila mentioned something which I kind of laugh at because it's the general part of it, because it's scary now as I look back or look at myself now and think how little I know about any particular subject. I think we all bring our specialties to the GC position, but it's been so long since I litigated, I don't think anybody wants me to write a brief. And it's probably been long enough since I drafted a contract where I probably shouldn't be doing that either. So I think at a certain point, you sort of let go of the notion that you're going to be as good or as an expert on the areas that you felt like you were, because you're spreading yourself across a lot of topics now. I think the other thing that you mentioned, I think for me, I think my biggest contribution is my judgment, and the difference between me and my outside counsel is no one knows the business better than I do, and so I have to take whatever is told to me about the relative risk of a situation and then digest it in terms of my business. And that's the real life advice I give to our CEO or CFO or whatever. And to me, I think that's the judgment that they're really looking for.
Absolutely, and it's interesting, another thing that seems so important in-house as distinguishable for what is focused on at law firms is this notion of succession planning, and how part of your legacy is, how do you build a strong succession plan? And I know, Sheila, that's an issue you care about. Can you talk a little bit about how that is part of being an effective leader, and perhaps also how some of your learnings there could be applicable in law firm context?
Sure. So we're a big department. We're 90-plus lawyers. So it's probably about 12 years ago now. As I said, I've been general counsel forever. I can't remember when I wasn't general counsel. I used to be the young general counsel. Now I'm the old general counsel. But about 12 years ago, we did an outing in a park with kind of my direct reports and their direct reports. And I realized that I was the youngest one there. And I thought that hit me square in the face, like we have to do some succession planning. So that's kind of our model. We have very deep subject matter experts, partner level experts in a variety of fields. We're a very heavily regulated business. So we started recruiting, and we recruited a fantastic group. And so even over the last, I think, 5 or 6 years, I've recruited about a third of the lawyers who are at New York Life. And what we realized is it's not just enough to recruit the new talent. You have to make that knowledge transfer happen. And so we put together a program to do that. And so we have a big development program where every year, every lawyer has to teach something and learn something. It's documented. It's part of their performance reviews. But we also realized that if we wanted to document so for example, in our tax department, it's a very specialized area of the Internal Revenue Code, as you can imagine, dealing with, insurance. It's some of it is qualified, some of it's not qualified. It's very complicated. And we have these people who've been doing this for, 30 years. And it's all in their heads and in their emails, right? And so what we did is we hired a very junior tax lawyer, and we had her interview them and get all of this and organize it by section of the Internal Revenue Code that was that was relevant to the company. And what comes out of that is a couple of things. Number one, we have a record of it. Number two, that person has learned a ton. And number three, the person who has all of that knowledge, because sometimes people are very guarded about this. They think, well, that's what keeps me here. They feel good about having, taught that to somebody else. So that is one aspect of it. The second thing is I encourage people to rotate. People who want to be, are on a generalist track. People who are on a specialist track can remain, just where they are and do what they do and get deeper and deeper expertise. That's highly valued and rewarded. But if you want to be on a more generalist track, I encourage people to get outside, to transfer into the business or into another corporate area to kind of understand the perspective of the client. And, people come in and out, like right now, our head of HR is a former litigator, but she had been in and out of HR a couple of times before she did that. So that also gives people opportunity. It gets them exposure because you're not the only person who really cares about who is going to be the next chief investment counsel in our case, or chief insurance counsel. The clients care about that, so you want them to get to know them. So that's another thing. But we spend probably 12 hours twice a year with my senior team talking about every single lawyer. What are their development needs? What's next for them? What are the right opportunities for them?
So that's a really nice segue into this next area that I want to explore, which is really what do you want for your teams? And I think what I hear a lot of in-house lawyers lament is that their organizations are flat and there's not as much opportunity for growth. And how should they focus on developing themselves? And I know this is something, Maria, that you're very focused on. Can you talk about how to really grow in an in-house role particularly when in-house legal departments are often flat?
Right, and obviously I'm coming from a very different place where I have a legal department of 3 lawyers and 1 general counsel and 2 more junior lawyers. And they're constantly looking for opportunities to learn and grow. And I give them to them both in my department so I can share with them whatever I can share with them, but I also require them to go and take the trainings that are available to our employees generally. I work with a lot of millennials and whatever the next generation is in my role. I'm the average age at my company of employees is 25. And so I understand that generation is in particular looking for training and for development and for mentorship and asking for it in a way that it never occurred to me to ask for it when I was their age. I just sat in my office and waited for somebody to give me work and tell me if I was doing okay and get my review once a year. That is not, that's not how I see this generation working. The reality is I try to be very direct with the lawyers that work with me and that I've worked with in the past. And obviously in our company, there's only ever going to be 1 general counsel, and hopefully we'll grow and we'll get bigger and we'll have a much bigger department and we'll go public and all those things. But I can't guarantee those things right now. And our time frame may not be their time frame. So my obligation to them is to train them as best I can to make sure they are the best lawyer for our company. And and if they choose to leave and go somewhere else, that's okay. Life is long, and I may get to hire them again, or they may get to hire me. But that's I think it's not fair to them to not treat them that way. And I think one of my former companies, when I knew I was leaving for the succession planning thing, I hired somebody and I went into my general counsel's office and I said, well, if you like me, you're going to like her because she's the smarter, younger version of me. And when I left, 8 months later, a lot of the business people said to me, we can't thank you enough for hiring her because we're really worried about what was going to happen when you left. And I said, well, why wouldn't I hire somebody who's smarter and younger and better than me? Because that's the idea. This whole, some people, like I said, are very guarded about doing that. I think it's very short-sighted, both for yourself, for your team, and for your company.
Absolutely, and I think this notion of not being covetous of your talent is really important, and I think it translates also in the law firm context, that some law firms, are challenged by this issue. I don't know if you've had that experience where, you may want to poach somebody and law firms are not so happy about it, but it's kind of a natural thing that goes on.
I would say it's probably the opposite. I think, law firms realize associates leave, so they'd rather them go to a client to,
Certainly.
Solidify that relationship. So I have had partners say, don't you think about touching that person, and I can't afford that person, so it works out okay, right? So, but yeah, I think, probably career development and succession planning is something that I think about a lot more now than I did probably, say, 10 years ago. I think part of it is, at Yex in particular, we happen to have a little bit of an older executive team, so I think we think about it because of that. But I think for me, I try to encourage my team. We're a little bit bigger than your department, not anywhere near your department, so I think it's an interesting situation. We're getting to the point, we have about 9-10 lawyers where we're starting to specialize, and we can't just hire the best available athlete and have them work on a ton of different things. I need a securities lawyer, I need an IP lawyer, or whatever. But I still try to encourage people with, taking care of those responsibilities, broadening what they work on, and looking for other things or other ways to, sort of get involved in different parts of the company. I think that's important. I think, like you said, you know, people are going to leave and do other things. I'd rather have them do great than, you know, go out and flounder. But I also try to encourage, especially, I think, you know, younger folks, millennials probably. I think there's this, you know, sort of impatience these days, this sense of urgency where I think a lot of them have friends who a year out are like GCs of startup companies. And so it's like, you know, to me, that's mind-boggling. You know, if I was a GC 2 years out, that'd have been a disaster. I mean, you don't even know what you don't know at that point. But there is like this sense of urgency, and I feel like I try to tell people, you will never regret staying, you know, a little bit longer, learning from experienced lawyers, experienced business people, and waiting for the right opportunity.
So I'm curious, Sheila, your take on this, and obviously you've been at New York Life a long time, but I actually give a lot of advice about developing a healthy appetite for risk in your career. And so how do you go about this with your lawyers in terms of counseling them about, you know, if they really want to advance, you know, how do you assess whether it's appropriate to maybe leave the household name company and maybe have a bigger title at a smaller place and sort of balancing all that?
Well, I mean, I don't encourage that. But there's so much opportunity. We're a Fortune 69 company.
Right.
So we're a huge company. There's plenty of opportunity within New York Life. And the risks that I encourage people to take are the things that I described before. Go out and work in the business. And a lot of people are just really not comfortable doing that.
Right.
But that is, you know, really an important next step for success in the company. And I'm also, in fairness, I'm also sit on the executive management committee, so I wear the executive hat too, and we really don't encourage people to poach our talent.
Right.
Although I will say the people who have left, many of them come back.
Mm-hmm.
So
well, they're probably a little afraid too, right? I'm a little scared sitting next to you. But I actually want to just stay with you for a moment because I know, you know, another big trend in in-house legal departments, particularly the large ones, is the use of operations and people who are specifically not in a legal role but in an operations role. Can you talk a little bit about how that function you think should be managed in an in-house legal department and whether it's exclusively externally focused in terms of outside legal service providers, or is it also used to manage the internal workings of your team?
yes. So as I said, we're 90 plus, and I have other areas under my supervision. So we do have a small operations group. It's somebody who came from our finance team. And started out to manage really just the external, to manage the law firm billings, and we started even before there was e-billing. So it was very paper intensive. But we also, as I said before, we like to have metrics about how much how much we're spending, and we like to keep track of that. So that was how it started. But now it's a little team, and they're also they'll kind of help with the administration of the paralegals and the administrative assistants. They are the people they'll run comp for me, compensation, help out with that, doing the Excel spreadsheet, something that I'm incapable of doing. They'll handle HR matters. They'll interface with other areas. If in our contract area, sometimes they'll need some interface with vendors and that sort of thing. So they do largely what you'd expect, kind of an office manager or an admin officer to do.
Right. So just kind of transitioning a little bit about, operations certainly is often external facing, and thinking about your decisions, each of you, about using outside counsel and other legal service providers. You talk a little bit about, and I'll start with you, Marie, on this, just judgment calls about, how do you assess outside counsel, make the decision of who to use, what is attractive and distinguishable to you about different law firms?
Oof, that's a big question. I always think of outside counsel as an extension of me. Like every time I hire a lawyer, I think, whatever advice I take and whatever advice I give based on that advice is my reputation and my career, right? And so I'm very careful about who I work with and whose advice I take. And I don't tend to choose one specific kind of lawyer or law firm. I tend to work with people who are very curious and interested in my business and know it inside and out, people who are very proactive. One of the things that I find can be very frustrating as an in-house lawyer, and I'm sure others will feel the same way, is when you get a lot of advice and no direction, here's a bunch of scenarios.
Right.
and no strategy. I mean, we don't have time in our roles not to also have a strategic partner.
Right.
And so that's something I always look for, somebody who's not only giving me the options, but giving me the recommendation. And
Because you also wonder, like, how many hands do they have? On the one hand, on the other hand.
yeah, a lot. Exactly. And the other thing is funny, because sometimes we will get, given our kind of brand, firms will necessarily maybe put forward someone who's a big fan of our brand, rather than maybe the best person for the job.
Right.
And that is also a little bit curious and frustrating.
Right. No spandex in court.
I mean,
It's not like
and the
a
funny
need.
thing is, I'm happy to go take a class with you, and I will,
Right.
but I probably won't hire you.
Right.
And so there's that too, just making sure you're putting forward the best person for the role, not necessarily the person who's most interested.
Right. It's interesting because both you and Ho have talked about the importance of knowing the business and outside counsel doing that. And Ho, you talked about specifically, there's nobody who knows the business outside as well as you do. Can you talk about how law firm lawyers can really learn the business and not just the business as in the industry, but also the culture, so that they can serve you better?
Yeah, I mean, that's tough. If I had the answer to that, I think, that'd be valuable. I think that, for me, I've been in, technology for a while. I think for me, it's important for the law firm to sort of stay up with the times. Even simple things like using our product. I mean, that's not it, but at least use our product. And I think a lot of lawyers and a lot of partners at law firms tend to be, oh, I'm not tech savvy and that sort of stuff. And that's not good enough anymore. You should be tech savvy. And my last company was an ad tech company, and we put ads on mobile apps. And, it's like every conversation started off with me trying to explain what a mobile app was. This was 2012. I mean, it was a few years after the iPhone. And so it's frustrating. So I think, those are the basics. But then also, to your point, you got to also understand, the culture. A tech company doesn't operate the same way as, a 100-year-old law firm. And so I think, you have to make an effort to understand the culture, our appetite for risk, the pace at which we do business, which is a big thing. I think, we live in a sort of a society where, everything happens in an instant. And that's how, tech companies work. And so it's not good enough if I send an email and then don't hear back from you in a couple days, and you say you were, at another company's board meeting. That's not the right answer.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, I think it's a gradual process.
Absolutely.
Playing off the culture point, it's very important, and I agree. And I made that mistake earlier in my tenure as GC of hiring a big, a very well-known litigator at a big New York firm, and this guy was like a take no prisoners kind of guy, and I do not want that to be the face of the company, right? So he didn't understand that that was the point, because it was win at all costs, and I didn't understand that he was going to do that. So it's worth upfront educating the law firm, and it's worth upfront for the lawyers and law firms to ask that question. How do you want me to do this? Tell me a little bit about the culture of the company, because I think that is hugely important. And to echo something that was said earlier, the more curious somebody is about the company, about the thing works, even if they don't know it coming in the door, I find the more effective they're going to be for us.
It's interesting, this issue of curiosity has come up a number of times. Also, certainly diversity has been increasingly a criteria for selecting outside counsel. I'm just wondering, anybody to pipe in here on what levers you're using in that regard, if any?
In selecting outside counsel?
Yes.
So we're a signatory to Resolution 113 of the ABA, and I brought along a little stat that I learned yesterday, which is, I think this is New York law firms, but it was something like 77% of the lawyers on management committees in law firms are white males. And they're saying, they're sort of touting like increases. So women on management, this is the good news, women on management committees increased from 20% to 23.6%, and minorities increased from 7.1 to 9.4. So, a lot of work to be done. And I think that this was a really good step that was taken, because I think that if you just say, you need to be more diverse, it's like saying, here, go drive a car. I'm teaching my son to drive a car, and he doesn't know how to drive a car. So you kind of have to explain what the problem is in context. And I think that doing this, like having a uniform metric across all law firms, is going to be very helpful in getting people to understand what the issue is. And then I think the second thing is to not pretend that I expect that things are going to change overnight. But I'll tell you, even when I first became general counsel, it was 2000, and the big firms that had done a lot of work for the company, one by one, were like taking me out to lunch or dinner. And as far as I could see, half of the lawyers who are partners in New York were women, because they always had that woman with them, right? It was always the relationship partner, and some poor woman that they dragged out of like retirement trusts and estates.
She was really full.
Exactly. So I think there is a particular sensitivity, at least to the gender issue, just by virtue of the fact that I am a woman. And I mean, people, so people know that I'm going to ask questions about that. That's, I guess that's pretty much all that was done so far. But I really do think that this Resolution 113 and getting these measurements on a uniform basis and letting, all these companies signing on and letting law firms know that that is an expectation, I think I feel, this time I really mean it, I feel optimistic that we're going to.
And the other piece of it is not just measuring it, of course, but a willingness
Yes.
of some GCs to move business accordingly and make choices, or have it be a tiebreaker if that's the case. I'm wondering if either of you want to opine on it as well.
It hasn't been yet. I mean, I think it's important. I think for us, I don't think we farm out nearly as much work, and I think most of our outside work is provided by a handful of firms that have historical relationships with the company. So we're not quite yet at the point where I think we can comfortably shift things based on those type of criteria, but it's important that we get there.
So one thing that I do with the firms that we use all the time is when they send out those partner announcements, I call them up and say, are you kidding me?
Okay. Yeah. I'll do that.
Any thoughts, Maria, for you?
I mean, I'm sort of in the same boat in that I don't, the amount of work that we have with outside counsel is fairly limited. It's something that I think about. I sit as an executive sponsor of our diversity and inclusion organization internally at the company, so it's something I think about for recruiting purpose for our own, the company as a whole, not just from the legal department perspective.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
So it's a little bit broader than just our department.
So I want to open up to questions in a moment. I just want to put one more question out to you guys before we do, and I'm going to ask what your pet peeve is in terms of law firms that you've worked with, and obviously no naming names, but really, and I'm asking you in a constructive way, because I think a lot of times law firms or law firm lawyers will not know, like, I shouldn't do this. So could you share your number one pet peeve? You look like you're chomping at the bit. So.
No, I'm ready. I got mine.
Yeah, go ahead.
Mine
We'll start with
is
Sheila.
when
Yes.
they ask, we're willing to do any kind of creative billing arrangements that you want. So how, what do you want to do and how will you design it? And my answer to that is always, it's not my business model that has issues. It's your business model that has issues. So you should think of how you want to present yourself to the clients, not vice versa, because if they're doing all these bespoke arrangements, by definition, it's, that's not going to work. So
really taking the onus on really sharing those great recommendations and not expecting it of you.
Coming up with them first.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. What about you?
I sort of touched on this. I think being in a technology company, I think it is really frustrating when law firms sort of stay, 3 steps behind on the technology front. And so even, simple things like, if I have to, send some documents over and they can't receive files from like Box or, the G Suite or things like that, it's frustrating. It's like, you have to get with the times. And, I don't have an assistant who's going to, scan all these and PDF it to you. So, I think, technology-wise, getting,
And I think that's a reflection of culture as well. I years ago interviewed the GC of Lego, and she was like, sometimes she has these lawyers who come and visit her offices, and there's like people from the technology group who are like trying out different products and like wheeling by and wearing funny clothes and things. And she's like, so she'll have somebody who comes in who's really buttoned up, and she's like, this person is not going to understand our business. So I mean, I don't think they have to be in spandex if they want to represent SoulCycle, but I think also there is some in between, it seems. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think I mentioned the thing about too many options and no strategy, but the other thing I think is, and I would say this, if I have a really good relationship with a particular lawyer at a firm, and I say, do you have an expert that can do this? And they refer me to someone, and that person is not the right person or doesn't really know what they're doing, but they're just trying to get the business, it's really dangerous because you've just put yourself at risk. Because you've just told me that you've got someone, and then I talk to that person and they don't know, they're not what I need. So I would much rather you say, I don't have somebody, but I know the expert and I can find that, I can help you get to that person, because it's damaging both to the relationship that I have with that partner or associate, because I think, you're not only wasting my time, but, you're putting yourself at risk. You're risking the work that you do for me by referring me to somebody who just is not the right person. And so that desperation to try and keep the work at the firm, it could ultimately hurt you.
Right. Instead, you want to be that connector or problem solver.
Exactly.
You also, run the risk of people thinking, you don't understand the business or you
Right.
don't understand the problem. Like there's a lot of layers. It's a really important point. So let's open up to questions. I think we have a mic in the room so the webcast people can hear as well. If you'd like, feel free to, in addition to saying your name, and we have a hand in the back, to start, I think, back there. Just say where you're affiliated with if you'd like as well.
Hi, my name is Joel Silverman, and I am a former general counsel to a Japanese trading company and in transition, which is a totally different issue, but and one I won't ask questions about here, but I would be interested talking to some of you later about how you do it as a mature person. But what I was intrigued by is that you didn't discuss, and maybe you can discuss with us now, a whole aspect of that you know as well as I, the care and feeding of your president and the other senior executives and the board, and how you learn those things, and what you think folks who are coming up through the ranks can do to begin to prepare for that.
Anyone want to jump in with that?
I mean, I would say that experience is the best teacher. So for me, I had exposure to the board pretty early on because, as I said, I was building that compliance function. So I went to the audit committee on a regular basis. But I felt prepared for that because of my first job, I was constantly presenting to these senior executives from other companies. So what I try to replicate for my team is make sure that I'm taking natural and also manufacturing opportunities for them to present before the management committee and the board or committees of the board on a regular basis, because the only way you can really prepare for that is to do it. So that's what we do.
Any other thoughts? And Ho, you've obviously been at 2 public companies, and thoughts on this? I mean,
like you said, experience helps a lot. I think my experience now with this board is vastly different from the last company where it was my first time being a public company GC. I think you just sort of, you learn, and then I think with experience, I think you develop a better sort of sense of how to interact with the board. I think the boards themselves can vary wildly, among board members in terms of the experience they have, either with public companies or your industry or whatever. Some of them are, still on from, the VC investment, and they'll transition into the public company board, whereas others may be, experienced public company directors, and how you interact with them are very different. And so, yeah, I mean, I think you just sort of get a better sense of it over time the more you do it.
And it seems that some companies, the GCs, are in that trusted circle of 2 or 3 people that the CEO really can go to, and then in other cases it's not. And it just, part of it is, it seems really contributing your value as a business advisor and not just seeing as that person obstructing the business or having your team do that or those sorts of things. I don't know, Maria, if you had anything to add on that.
No, I didn't. No.
Okay. I think I saw a hand right here, yes.
Thank you. Hi, thank you so much. This has been so helpful. So I'm a recently appointed GC of a broker-dealer that's affiliated with a big hedge fund. And I've never served in this role before. I have a couple questions for you. One is, what do you tell the new GC or AGC who's both having to act as the general counsel role and also the kind of individual contributor without resources? How do you do both of those and do those well without being seen as the line lawyer? And the second is with those bigger organizations, when you have your own business and mandate and relationships with outside counsel, but there's a bigger organization that also has those things as well that you need to be conscious of. How do you manage that with the other lawyers and the other GCs, et cetera?
Maybe, Ho, since you've been at a sub, maybe you had been, so maybe it'd be interesting for you to take the second question and then one of you for the first.
Well, I think I don't know whether my experiences in those particular public companies are good representatives. I mean, I think it's very hierarchical. When you tend to be a sub of a parent company. So I don't. I think you just. For me, it was focusing on the business, running the business, making sure I understood the business well. And then, sort of, you are sort of beholden to your parent, and, I don't know, I don't really feel like I have much to.
I can take that one. I can
Yeah.
take that one
Go for
because
it.
I serve, in a law department of 3 lawyers. I am both the general counsel who gets to do the sexy, strategic, cool stuff and be in the cool meetings, and I also am the one who gets the call like, oh, we just got this NDA. It's Saturday at 2 p.m. Can you just make this change? I do both, and you just, humility. And being there, right, for whatever it is they need, right? If it's changing the one line in the NDA, if it's giving strategic advice, you're there for all of it. And you're just a team player, and that's really valuable, I think, in-house they know you're good. They wouldn't have hired you otherwise. And so the ability to do both is just, you just have to do it until you get to build your own team.
And I don't think it's really any different even when you have your own team.
Yeah.
Because, I'm always surprised when I answer the phone, people are like, is this you? Do you answer your own phone? I'm like, yes, I answer my own phone. And I write my own documents. I mean, you should do that.
Yeah.
And that's how you can stay close to the business
Yes.
also. I mean, in terms of the day-to-day issues. I think I saw a hand here. Thank you.
Thanks. Hi, I'm David Garber. I'm with Princeton Legal Search Group. And Debbie, first of all, thank you for the invitation. It's the first program I've attended, and great panel, great discussion. So my question goes to metrics. Touched on it briefly, I think, as to outside counsel, but I'm wondering about, given the law department is not a profit center and there's increasing scrutiny on the law department and the bottom line, just as there are other departments at your corporations, are any of you using metrics to either measure performance of your lawyers, measure performance of your department, whether it's value of deals closed, value of litigation avoided, turnaround time on documents, and how's that going, and is it effective?
We do lawyers per $1 billion of revenue, outside legal spend per $1 billion of revenue. We look at, settlements. We look at, and we look against our peers. There's not a lot of peer data on the other things that you're talking about. And it's really, even when you get into it, it's comparing apples and oranges. So we haven't been able to do that. But again, we're a very highly regulated business with a lot of different areas. Maybe you've had some different experience in that.
We don't really do that quite yet, not on a per lawyer basis. I think, we're growing right now. We're a growth company, and so I'd say, both the legal department and the G&A function in general, it's sort of understood and expected, especially during this period where we had to ramp up for the IPO and then we're newly public, that it's going to be maybe running a little bit high at this point. So it's sort of a nice period to be in, that nobody's going to give you too much grief over your costs. But no, I think as we continue to grow, though, I think that's going to be something we look at.
But I have a question relatedly, because I think this issue I hear from a work-life perspective from a lot of law firm lawyers who go in-house who say they used to be a revenue generator, now they're part of this cost center, they perceive that. And they find that when they go in-house, their presence becomes much more of a proxy for their value, and they need to be at all those meetings. And there's this expectation that if you're not there, that their value is not seen as much. And I just wonder, have any of you experienced that, or you think your teams experienced that?
I would say that may be part of the corporate culture, and you better evaluate that corporate culture before you may think you're jumping off, jumping off of something, but you may be jumping out of the frying pan into the fire if that's not the kind of thing that you expect. If you expect that you're going to work from home 5 days a week, and this is a culture where, nope, there's a morning meeting at 9 a.m. every morning, which a lot of law firm lawyers find jarring, that sometimes we have 8 a.m. meetings. But we don't have 10 p.m. meetings. But you really want to suss that out before you go in, because that is part of it. That's part of our culture. There's a lot of meetings, and it's not FaceTime. It's more collaboration time. But you need to understand that.
Right. Although I think, there's a sense in some ways at the firm that you're, at the company, that you're always on call, because you are always on call and the client's right next door. But I think I also try to encourage people to be protective of their time. And I do sometimes say, like, what do you need me for in this meeting? What's the agenda? What are we talking about? Is there a way we could just solve this in a 5-minute conversation? Okay. So I try to do that. I also encourage my lawyers to do that if they can. Sometimes you have to show up for a meeting, but if you can have, if you can get yourself exempted from that 30-person meeting where you're not quite sure what the agenda is, and what the legal issues might be.
Absolutely.
I think it's absolutely a culture issue. I think there are a couple things in what you said. I think, number one, I think as a company, we're trying to cut back on meetings. And, I think there are too many meetings for the sake of having meetings. But I think in terms of the culture thing, I certainly, in terms of running the department, don't, value FaceTime for the sake of FaceTime. And if, I think, the sort of unwritten thing we all know is that people expect to have a more manageable work-life balance when they come in-house versus working at a very big law firm. And so, I try to respect that. Everybody works really, really hard, and, I treat them as professionals, but that doesn't mean I have to see them in the office every day at a certain time. And I think that's part of the culture you build.
Right, and I think also being at a technology company as you are, I think I've seen, in my experience, the technology companies are a little bit more of the outliers with other in-house legal departments on this subject, that I see more of a culture of meetings. And I think, interestingly, there is a luxury in the billable hour that the firm generates the same revenue wherever you bill, and so I think that affords a certain flexibility. So, other questions? Yes, right here we have, and then in the back.
Sorry. Thanks, Anna. Hi, Jonathan, GC at Casper. Just curious, as you sort of assess talent and recruit, when you're at a law firm, it's very easy. You go for the top law schools, GPAs. As you get an onslaught of resumes, as you try to build out your legal teams, how do you guys go about recruiting talent, assessing it with, harder metrics to analyze people by?
Do you want to start with that?
Sure. Was that me or who?
No, I think.
Me?
Yes.
Okay. So I wouldn't say it's harder metrics. I look at obviously what their experience is and how relevant is it to to what we need. But my biggest test is how well, particularly because we hire a lot of people straight out of law firms, how well are they going to make the transition? How well are they going to some of the things that we spoke about before, be able to write the bulleted memo and not the, not the thing with the cites and the heretofores and whereases? How willing are they to, and in our company, they may not be the smartest person in the room because we work with like actuaries and data scientists, but they may think they are, and how, I give them opportunities in the interview to kind of try to see if they'll suck all the air out of the room, testing for that humility and, kind of looking at confidence, competence, ability to communicate in plain English. And I just call it, my shorthand for that is like, are they normal? Is this the normal test? And that's when it gets to me. I have, the people who are really evaluating the expertise are doing that beneath me. But to me, that's the most important thing when you're hiring somebody at a law firm. Are they going to be able to make that transition?
The other thing I think I've learned over the years is I feel like we used to spend a lot of time talking about fit and will they fit here and what are they like us? And I've spent a lot of time thinking about how do I hire somebody who is like the opposite of me, who thinks differently, who brings different skill set, who is, really into the details where I am not, or is, and having just in balancing out the department, having a variety of different kinds of people, and that can service both the clients and also, broaden your department and bring different views into the mix.
It's interesting, Bliss Lawyers is a talent company, and this notion of complementary hiring is something increasingly we're hearing, and it is really smart. It's often used in the diversity context, but otherwise, just in terms of substantive expertise, it's important. The other thing I think is a really interesting indicator, and Bill Henderson, who is a really talented professor out of the University of Indiana, has done some interesting research on this, that some of the greater indicators of success are things that evidence grit. So you look at really talented athletes or great musicians, and those types of qualities sometimes are better indicators than the classic pedigree default that we as lawyers so often turn to. So I think his work is really interesting in that. I think we saw 2 hands here and then 1 on the other side. So thank you.
Hi, I'm Dina Trowgood from Travelers. My question to you is, to what extent are you experimenting with on-demand legal services to your business partners? So workflow automation, chatbot assistance, whether it's, the chatbots, voice assistants, providing services, providing answers to some commonly asked and easy to answer questions on demand.
No, not at all.
We were going to actually ask for a translation on that.
Yeah.
Sorry, we can't be helpful on that front. I saw a hand right
But I might
here.
want to be a chatbot.
Yeah. If anybody in the audience is, has a hand and wants to, comment on that kind of thing, of course, we welcome feedback on that.
Actually, I was going to do that because I've been thinking about instituting a chatbot. I work with Pfizer, leading the clinical legal support team, and a lot of the questions that we get with respect to clinical development are, the repetitions of what we've heard from other clients, and some of them are just common sense. They're not even necessarily legal questions. And so I've been working with our IT team to try to create a chatbot. Yes. A lot of those types of questions go to our team of legal specialists or paralegals, but their time is really valuable, and we have a very highly skilled team, so I'd like them to do higher level work.
So is that the impetus, really an efficiency type of model?
Yes.
Okay. Any other drivers? Just interested to know.
I think there's a client satisfaction aspect as well, because particularly when they have those sorts of simple questions, they would like and probably need a very quick response. But the legal specialists are as busy as the lawyers, and it could take a day or two.
Right.
To something that really you could knock out in a minute, or that the chatbots that could at least give them the beginning of an answer.
Terrific. Very helpful. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. But I had a question.
Oh, okay. You're allowed. Go ahead.
This is about the New York Life experience or program with respect to attorneys working in the business. This is something that happens very occasionally at Pfizer, but it happens informally. We don't have a program. I'm not clear on whether New York Life has a formal program to do this or not. But in general, when lawyers go into the business, they don't come back. in our
Not in
experience.
Sheila's group. She's made that very clear.
And that's what I thought.
They can go out into the business. They have to stay with New York Life, but they do tend to come back.
But that's what I'm curious
Yeah.
about, because on the rare occasions when an attorney does come back into the law department, they have not progressed in their career. They don't come back at a higher level. In fact, occasionally they have to actually take a grade below the grade they were when they left. So that implies, I think, that the experience on the business side is not seen as a plus.
Well, that,
And, so I'm just
if you ask,
interested
do you have a
in-
formal program? Well, I do it, so I guess that's a formal program.
Mm-hmm.
And the purpose of it is to develop somebody, and, maybe the development is they're going to go into the business and succeed there. We've had many people do that. Maybe it's that they're going to come back and be a better lawyer, but I view it as, or maybe it's more interesting, I mean, there's also lateral moves that make a person, it's more rewarding from a career perspective, but the idea is development and, momentum.
Mm-hmm.
I think we have some questions over here, down the row here. Thank you.
Nobody said it.
Thank you. Your insight is great. Carrie Heslin, Nook Freeman, and Sarah, we're a 100% women-owned employment law firm. My question is, you all highlighted the fact that you like your outside counsel to know and understand your business and your culture. And I know before we ever meet with a prospect or a new client, we do as much research as we can. I've got a fantastic marketing team that will get as much information from me as they can that's available online. But there is definitely a lot of information that only lives within your organization. So how do you expect or want outside counsel to get that information? Is it as simple as asking you, having a conversation, or is there some other means that you want us to employ?
Yeah, I wouldn't hire a private investigator. I think just ask.
I think just asking. I mean, I feel like sometimes you'll go into a meeting with someone and they'll talk about themselves and their practice for like 45 minutes. And then they're like, so what is it like bikes in a room? Is that what it is? And I'm like, yeah, it's bikes in a room. That's what it is. And it's really, just asking the questions is probably a good way to start.
Right, but along those lines, actually, I find personally visiting clients, if the clients are receptive, is amazing because you really get a feel for the culture. They're wearing jeans at Yex. They're not wearing jeans at some of the other legal departments. So actually just understanding kind of how people operate, I think you can be so much better at identifying what the feel is and really what the demands and needs may be of that legal department.
I'll also throw in, for me, what's frustrating is we're actually, we're public now, and we spent a lot of time writing the S1, which had a very detailed description of our business, and sometimes it's obvious that who you're talking to doesn't have the first, clue as to what you do, and it's like some basic diligence would have helped out a lot here. So I think the internet is a magical thing. There's a lot of really good information out there.
And what I would add also is knowing what's going on in the news on that company.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really embarrassing if you're referencing one of the executives who's no longer there. I mean, there's some things about being current, and what's timely and just what's happening. What are the press releases and things that are out there?
I'd say in a natural conversation, because I've also had people come in who have overdone it. Well, I see that you, and I'm like, I didn't even know that, right? But it's not about showing like I did all my homework and it's really more about showing a genuine interest in, what is this place? Who are these people? What do they want?
Hi, I'm Kate Cronin, Deputy General Counsel at FactSet. So my question for you is, how do you manage it all as General Counsel? If you'd be kind enough, would you share some of your management style with us? Like, do you do a lot of one-on-ones? Do you make time to meet with the business? Do you do skip levels? How do you balance being tough and nurturing with all the people you work with, staying in touch with all the issues you want to be on top of with still being able to delegate?
I'm totally stressed by that question. I hope you guys have the answer.
I work out every morning. No, I don't know. It's like everything. There is no work-life balance. There's just life or work, and it's all happening at the same time. And sometimes you're better at some things and not as good at other things. I think staying connected to your team is critical, though. I mean, there are times when I feel like I go into my hole with work or whatever I'm stressed about, and I really miss those touch points. So I actually try to meet with the folks that I can as often as I can. I know I have the luxury of having a small team and being close to them. And to me, I get a lot from that as well as giving a lot. But I don't know. I'm probably really bad at most things most days. I'm only good at like maybe one thing.
I think for myself, I definitely have evolved in that regard. I think probably nowadays the biggest thing that I didn't used to do well, that I think I am better at now, is delegating and trusting the people you've hired. And I think I've at times, I mean, that's where you just sort of, can get really dragged down if you micromanage and you really, can't trust the people that you've put there to do things. So I think for me, delegation is, a critical part of being able to balance. And then I'm also a lot more transparent now with the team than, that I've probably ever been, so.
I do have one-on-ones, and I do expect people to have an agenda at the one-on-ones and to say what's happened over the last week. I do have skip level meetings too. I really like all the people that I work with, so it's also that's easy for me. It's because I think it's also important to have some sort of personal relationship with people. So it's not all about like what'd you do, what'd you tell me. There's some humor injected into that too. And I mean I'm with you. It's just you're living life, right? Inside outside. Some days are better than others. Some days it's all about my kids. Some days it's all about my job, and the kids are disappointed. Some days it's all about my
Sometimes they're probably
vice
happy,
versa.
right? When it's all about
now
the
they
job.
are because they're teenagers.
Yeah,
yes.
same here,
Yeah. But I don't think there's a perfect answer to that. But I do think that there are certain disciplines that are important to stay on top of things. So if you tell somebody you want a weekly report, you know what that does? On day 6, they're going to make sure that the 6 things they told you last week are done. So you do want to put those guideposts in, and that's really how governance works, right? I mean, that's why there are board meetings, because you're driving to results. So I think that is something that I learned over the years. That's a very important thing to do.
I think we have time for one last quick question. I know Randy has one, maybe really, really quick, you guys. Is the mic? You have it. Go ahead.
And I speak fast, so it's okay. I'm Randy Rosenblatt. I have the fortune of working with Debbie at Bliss. But before that, I was in-house counsel at Heineken. And one of the toughest things was getting the business to come to legal and to view us as a partner and not as the team that was going to kill the deal. And the general counsel at the time, when I was there, who still is the general counsel, was very much encouraging partner with the business. I would sit on the floor with the businesses I supported and whatnot. So my question is, what do you encourage of your teams in terms of them getting the business to trust them, to partner, to come with the problem, not just to bury the body? I ran into a lot of body burying. So I'm just curious what types of tips you share with your team in that sense.
We're such a big old company, and we're so heavily regulated that we have. When people ask me, I'm like, "What do you mean get a seat at the table? What do you mean we're partners with the business?" So that's not an issue that I face.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think that for us, since we're such a relatively small department, and our business, everything's about the revenue. And so if you don't work with the business, then you're not going to work out at the company. And so I think it's a message certainly that I try to instill in my team, but it also is like almost self-enforcing. It's like, when you're a company like ours, you're all about the business and getting deals done. So.
Having some of the companies that I've worked for might have had similar cultures to that, not where I am right now, especially like a lot of international companies, and they're like, what is this American lawyer doing, like poking around in my business over here? Ultimately, I think it's just a matter of like being persistent and inviting yourself. Like I used to invite myself to all the meetings. I would be like, oh, you guys are having a meeting with distributors? I'm totally going to go to that and give a compliance training. Isn't that awesome? And I wouldn't wait for the invitation. I would just, sort of impose myself. And what are they going to say? No? I mean, ultimately, they sort of have to do what you want because you're legal, and there's a little bit of a you can push a little bit into it. So I think it's a little bit imposing yourself and asking a lot of questions. Again, going back to the like, so how exactly does this work? And tell me a little bit more about this. And people like to open up and tell you all about their business, and sometimes they tell you stuff that is problematic too.
So we're just about out of time. I want to end just with one question, really. We've talked about a bunch of different things. If you could just give us one parting message, either something that we haven't touched on that you really want to make sure is part of the conversation before we wrap up, or something that we just briefly touched on that you think you really want to underscore. Sheila, I'll start with you.
I think we talked about so much that was so good. I guess it's just the power of curiosity and asking questions and on both sides, on inside and outside counsel, inside counsel, and not being afraid to do that, and not being afraid when you don't know the answer. They always say in law school, don't ask a question that you don't know the answer to. You have to do that all day long.
I guess for me, it's like, we talked a lot about career path and stuff, and it's, just be patient and don't be wed to this, strict career plan, and, do good work. Good work gets noticed, and, the right opportunities will come up, and, above all, be respectful. Be respectful to your clients and, your superiors for sure, but, with everybody, with your, subordinates, and that gets noticed as well, so.
Mm-hmm. Coming from what we consider ourselves more of a hospitality company than a fitness company, and we spend a lot of time sort of repeating the same mantra that people will forget what you said and they'll forget what you did, but they won't forget how you made them feel. And I think that's really important in a legal role, because people have to feel like you got their back, like you can solve their problems. I look for that for outside counsel too. Did I walk out of that meeting thinking, well, I don't remember exactly what the 3 points were that we're going to put in that brief, but I'm convinced that we're definitely going to win. And so that sort of taking that with you and trying to figure out ways to make people feel like you've got their back, and looking for people that can really make you feel that way.
I think those are great points. I think something that hasn't precisely come up, but as we've sort of danced around it, is being a good listener. Mm-hmm. I think that having the curiosity, having those kinds of qualities of humility and vulnerability and things like that, but also just listening to what the needs are of, whether it's your team, whether it's outside counsel, listening to what the needs of their clients are, listening to your business partners. I think we do a lot of talking, and sometimes we just have to take it in and observe really what the messages are that are around us. So I want to thank this wonderful panel. Thank you so much. I want to recognize Latham and Watkins. They've just been an absolute pleasure to work with, and you guys are scattered around the room. I want to make sure I specifically name the people involved. Lauren Claricia, Nicole, of course, I don't know where you are, who made the generous introduction and welcome, Kathy Galvin, Alexandra Karademus, Erica Weinberg, and Alexandra Williamson. So thank you to Latham and for providing the venue and the lunch and everything else. So thank you. Thank you to the Association of Corporate Counsel, New York City chapter, and specifically Brian Campbell. You've been such a pleasure to work with again, so thank you for your support and for bringing all your members here. Really delighted to be able to have this opportunity to partner with you. And my assistant, Renee Green, who is, has been in touch with all of you. She's amazing, and thank you, Renee. And I want to just thank all the audience participants. I appreciate your feedback and your enthusiasm. I hope to see you after our summer recess. In the fall, we'll be announcing the next meeting very soon. And that's it. Have a great summer. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you, Debbie.
Thank you.